This program and the associated written materials are provided for informational purposes only and are not intended and must not be taken as legal advice on any particular set of facts or circumstances. You should not act or refrain from acting on the basis of any content included in this program without seeking legal or other professional advice on your specific matter. This program contains general information and may not reflect current legal developments or address your specific situation. This program and the associated written materials are not intended as a solicitation.
Thank you for joining us for Avoiding Scams and Predatory Behavior Following a Natural Disaster, guidance from the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office. I'm Belinda McCauley, Executive Director of the Beverly Hills Bar Association. Before I introduce our speaker, I want to express our sympathy to everyone whose homes were lost or damaged in the wildfires. Our goal in the wake of this terrible natural disaster is to provide unbiased information to help you get back on the path to recovery and rebuilding. If you haven't already, please visit bhba.org/recovery to see public service webinars about how to file insurance claims and what some of the tax issues are following the fires, among many other resources. That page is also available in Spanish if you want to share it with anyone who might need it. If you have any questions or suggestions for future topics, please email help@bhba.org. We are very grateful to the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office for doing this program today. We have an absolute expert from their team to talk about price gouging and other predatory actions we unfortunately expect to see after these fires, and how you can protect yourself and report these offenses. Hoon Chun is our speaker today. He has been a prosecutor with the LA County DA's office for more than 30 years and is currently the director of the Bureau of Fraud and Corruption Prosecutions. That unit prosecutes cases with the goal of ensuring that all businesses follow all applicable laws, ensuring a legal and level playing field for the benefit of consumers and the business community as a whole. And with that, I am very happy to turn things over to Hoon so that he can share so much of his expertise with us today.
Thank you, Belinda, and good morning to all. I hope everyone's doing well in these trying times. Well, let's begin. You see a picture of a house in Malibu that is no more, with Catalina in the background. Kind of unfortunately, a sign of the times that we're going through. If we could advance, please. So this is from the U.S. Forestry Service. They list and rank the most serious destructive California wildfires, and a very dubious honor. Eaton and Palisades fires, the two biggest ones, are very high up on the list, and they're not completely under control, although it looks good right now. And so this gives you context to what we're dealing with here. Next slide, please. So I'm going to focus on three topics, and by far I'm going to really focus on the first one. That's the immediate problem at hand. I'll do a little bit. I'm not really an insurance expert, and I really can't give advice in civil matters. But I'll give you a little bit of useful information about insurance and how to deal with that. And also something that's going to come up. We'll talk a little bit about construction, consumer rights in the construction context. And unfortunately, I'm afraid there are going to be people, perhaps even listening today. You have my sympathies that are maybe going to need to be familiar with these rules. Next slide, please. So let's talk about price gouging. It appears, based on the complaints we're seeing that are being sent to all of the local agencies, and by that I mean the California Attorney General is very active in this area. It's prosecuting these cases criminally. We're also very active, looking actively at cases. In the areas where we do misdemeanors. The LA City Attorney is looking actively at this. Santa Monica City Attorney is looking at this. The Department of Consumer and Business Affairs is looking at this and fielding complaints and investigating them. And in a moment, I'll tell you about the very first prosecution that was filed Tuesday, actually, charging someone criminally, a realtor, with this kind of violation. So if the idea of people is they're just going to do it and hope they don't get caught, it's not a very good thing to do. So next slide, please. So we have to start with these price gouging statutes with the declaration of emergency, which triggers all these protections. And so this is just January 7, 2025. Our governor, Gavin Newsom, declared a state of emergency, actually in both LA and Ventura counties. Obviously, based on where we are, I'm going to be focusing mostly on LA County. Next slide, please. There's a reference in one of the executive orders. So there's the initial declaration. There's a series of executive orders. You can see the number of it here on this slide. And one of them refers to the anti-price gouging statute, subdivisions B and C. B is the general provision about selling pretty much everything, anything, limiting the price increases to 10%. And C is having to do with construction and contracting for either debris removal or reconstruction and building. There's limits also. You can't raise their prices 10% before what you were charging on the day before the declaration of emergency. Next slide, please. And we'll get into those provisions more intensely. On the previous slide, you will see that B and C were actually extended by the governor for a full year. So they're going to be, those price controls are going to be in effect for a full year on B and C, okay? D and E, D has to do with hotels and motels, and E has to do with rental housing. Basically anybody who rents their home out, for example. It also covers Airbnbs, short-term housing. We'll get into that more specifically. And there's also subdivision F, which basically prohibits evicting a tenant to try to raise the rent. In my view, that's sort of belt and suspenders, because you can't raise the rent. I mean, that's the rule. And whether you do it by evicting somebody or not, you just can't do it. So I should say limited to 10%, and we'll get into those details later. Right now, that has been extended. Those provisions have been extended to March 8 of 2025. In other words, 60 days. But we fully expect, if prior experience is any lesson for us, this is going to be extended. I can't predict what the governor will do. I would be very surprised if these protections don't last at least 6 months, probably a year, maybe more. It's going to be dependent on how long the conditions, which include rebuilding, how long that's all going to take. Okay, next slide, please. There's another executive order. It is geared towards people who, in the goodness of their heart, took in people who were displaced by the wildfires. Maybe it's friends, maybe it's family, and maybe it's people who are taking in even strangers. And this empowers those people because, as we all know, some of the leases have restrictions on how many people can occupy, and we don't want people to be punished for their goodness. And so the ability to file for evictions, and even the ability to give notice that you're going to file or terminate a lease, those are prohibited by this executive order. And again, that's going to be effective till March 8, 2025. Again, expect that that's just for now. It's going to be extended. I would, again, I can't guarantee that, but if past is experienced, that's very likely to be extended for quite a bit of time. Next slide, please. Here's another executive order that to be aware of. This is in part, I think, what happened in, as you well know, the Maui fires. And so it is now prohibited, illegal, for anybody to land speculate. You know, and it, of course, this seems like who would do something like this, but you know, there are all types of people in the world. And there are all types of people, and some people think that this is an opportunity to buy land on the cheap, to take advantage of people who have been displaced or had their houses burned out, and maybe they can get a bargain. You know, especially, you know, a lot of the properties in Malibu, for example, on the coast, they were prime real estate. So you can just imagine people motivated by less than honorable, you know, ideas, trying to take advantage and trying to pick up a bargain. Well, what this executive order says is that you cannot make an unsolicited offer. You can't just approach people. You can't make cold calls. You can't, you know, contact people who are going through, you know, the stress of having lost their property and now offer, you know, bargain basement price. Actually, any price that's less than the fair market value on January 6th. Okay, and obviously, if it's a property that's been damaged, effectively, don't even think about it. Don't even think about, you know, because obviously, you know, the property is obviously going to be worth less, but still, you can't make that speculative offer trying to find a bargain. Okay, this is not the time to try to make money. That's, you know, that's the lesson and theme of all these statutes. This is a time for people in the community to get together, support each other, and you know, the rules of capitalism are put on hold for a little bit during a time like this. So if we can advance, please. So, and this is evident in Penal Code Section 396. It is in the Penal Code. These are criminal statutes. Okay, that's really important to note. So Penal Code Section 396 starts by telling us what I've been saying. This is, you know, normally, you know, we have a free market. The market dictates prices. You charge what the market is going to bear, and good for you if you're able to make a profit and support workers in your business, so forth and so forth. We suspend that principle. We limit that idea during times like this, when people are suffering and are, you know, burned out of their homes or whatever natural disaster has occurred. And the legislature wanted to make this clear. The public interest requires that excessive and unjustified increases in the prices of goods and services be prohibited. And this is important too. The section, you know, we're instructed, we're going to liberally construe it so that its beneficial purposes may be served. In other words, we're going to interpret all these things, you know, recognizing the spirit behind the statute. So that's important. When in doubt, you know, this is going to be interpreted to restrict the price increase. So, you know, and you know, at the end of this, we'll be getting to some of the kind of schemes that people seem to be trying to engage in to try to get around this. You know, well, you'll see how it doesn't really work out, and especially in light of the statutory provision that says that this is supposed to be statutes to be interpreted, to advance the spirit of the legislation. So we can move on to. So this was B. This was the one that's been extended for a year, or one of the two that was extended for a year. So this is the broadest one. It says pretty much you can't raise your prices pretty much on anything. It's food items, it's goods, consumer food items or goods or services for emergency cleanup, et cetera, et cetera. You can read that for yourselves. It includes housing, interestingly enough. And this was in the original statute as passed. And there was some debate about, well, what does that mean? Sell or offer to sell housing? I mean, and some people were reading this. There was a little bit of confusion. Some people were reading this, narrowly to say, well, that's only if you're putting your house up for sale or real estate up for sale. And so, and other people were saying, no, that includes, renting. And this was in at least the original version of this. Now they kept this in, but as we'll see, they made some to eliminate all doubt about what's prohibited. There are different provisions specifically addressing increasing rental prices. So there's just going to be no doubt anymore about this. So all these things, don't raise your prices more than 10%. Okay, and it's 10%. Meaning 10% from the price on January 6th. Okay, so if we can advance, please. Now there is an exception, recognizing sometimes businesses temporarily put things on for a sale. Like so, this is to address what if on January 6th, business, gave a bargain basement price. It's not its normal price for something. Does that mean that they're stuck with that price? No. I mean, this is the on sale exception, what I like to call the on sale. If it was truly on sale, then no, you use the price that you normally charged as the basis for the 10%. Next slide, please. There's also recognition that sometimes these disasters cause the cost of the good that you're selling to go up. You don't want to do it, but your cost just went up, and it's maybe the cost of the good if you're selling a good, or maybe costs of labor or materials that you're using to provide a service. There you can take the total cost, increased cost to you, the business, plus 10%, and then the markup that's customarily applied. So you take your cost, whatever the markup you customarily applied before the fire, and then you can add 10% to that, okay? So you can pass through these increased costs. All right, next slide, please. Now C is the one that governs contractors and cleanup. This one was extended up to a year. It normally is 180 days, but you saw the executive order. This is also extended for a year, just like the one we just looked at. And this covers, activity, services for cleanup or debris removal, for example, or repair or reconstruction. And again, you cannot increase the cost more than 10%. But again, recognizing that distortions happen to materials and labor, if that occurs, you can pass on those costs. Same formula that we just discussed. You whatever the actual additional cost is, you can add the markup that you normally do, and then 10% on top of that. Okay. Okay, so if we can move on from that. So now we get to hotels and motels. Now, in the Northern California prosecutors we've spoken to had more of a problem with this. And I do want to commend hotels or motels. By and large, I'm not saying it doesn't happen. We have seen complaints about this. They have fixed the problem that used to occur. So a lot of hotels and motels had an algorithm that looked at the marketplace and would increase prices depending on, what the market conditions were, but didn't factor in that in an emergency situation, emergency declaration situation, you can't just do that. And so they fixed their algorithms to adjust. And so we're not seeing as much of this. In fact, I'll share a personal story. I ended up moving out for a couple of days. We were in a really borderline area, and I was very surprised to see that a hotel, a well-known hotel, had normal rates. And maybe many of you have had the same experience. If not, we certainly want to hear about that. But again, it's the room rates. You can't raise them by more than 10%. There are some exceptions. If, again, understanding there may be distortions in the marketplace, if the hotel or motel has goods or labor that it uses to deliver the service, if that rises, you can pass that on. Also, seasonal adjustments. This may not apply as much here because we're still in the winter season, which many would consider the low season here. But I suppose if for some reason this thing gets extended all the way to the spring or summer, if there are normally seasonal rate adjustments, then you can still do those. And also recognizing that some hotels have booked rates well in advance. If you can honor those rates that were booked before January 7th. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so now this is where we're seeing the problems with rentals, and this is really the prototypical example would be somebody who is got one or more houses or apartment buildings, and they're looking around, and they're represented by realtors, and they're thinking, I can make some money here. I can make a killing. A lot of the people who were displaced are from quite affluent areas, and so, people may be thinking here, well, geez, we got a bunch of people who have the financial wherewithal. Why not, raise our rent as much as we can? And the answer really is because it violates the penal code, because it's a crime. We don't do that in the wake of an emergency situation. You don't take advantage of your fellow human beings like that, okay? And so what this basic rule is whatever your rental price was on January 6th, don't raise it by more than 10%. It gives you the additional 10%, which is, a very significant raise, but don't do more than that, okay? Not during a disaster time. And notice the verbs here. It's going to be very important, especially when we get to the kind of schemes that people are doing. And I don't know, they're ignoring some of the words of the statute. I think they may be thinking of a prior version or something. But it prohibits the advertising, the offering, or the charging of a rental price that's more than 10%. That word charging, as we'll see, has a lot of significance to some of the things that we see going on, and need to make sure that people in the community understand, and landlords understand that you can't get around the statute by some of the schemes that we're seeing. Next slide, please. There's some limited exceptions, again, pass through of the costs. If you had to, I mean, there could be scenarios where you've had to repair or make additions to the property that's being rented. That's not just normal maintenance, obviously. And you can increase it to reflect that as long as you amortize it over the period of the lease. So, if you spent $1,200, and you got a 12-month lease, and $100 per month, just as a simple example. Also, if there was an increase that was contractually agreed to prior to January 7, then yes, you can do that. Although here's a big caveat here. None of this excuses compliance with your local rent control. And that's too big a topic to take on here. A lot of it's very localized, but you've got to comply not only with Penal Code 396, but also any applicable rent control. So this doesn't get you out of it, but so you have to be kind of aware of both the limitations. Okay, next slide, please. All right, this language was added recently just to address some of the weird schemes that we saw as prosecutors and some of the strange justifications that people made. So here are some of the schemes that are explicitly now forbidden. Okay, so one was, oh, well, I increased by more than 10%, but that was to reflect that, take your pick, it was a real short lease or it was a real long lease. And so those aren't apples to apples. And so therefore I feel like I should be able to, no, that doesn't work. Okay. It didn't work back then, but just because of the prevalence of the scheme, it's now written into it that that you can't do that. Okay. There was also other schemes where, oh, well, before I didn't include gardening services. Now I do. And, oh, yeah, that's going to, tack on, $1,000 a month or whatever, ridiculous amount. That doesn't work. Okay. You can't say because you're adding goods or services, you're now going to jack up the rent more than 10%. Okay. There's one exception to that is furnished versus unfurnished. So if you were renting unfurnished and now you want to rent furnished, which sometimes may make sense because a lot of people, poor people who are displaced, don't have furniture. I mean, it all burned up. So there, and we'll get to this. You can. I believe when we get later to it, it's going to be an additional 5%. That you can add for going from unfurnished to furnished. And this is what I was mentioning. It makes clear that you still got to comply with local rent control ordinance. You can't just look at this statute and say, that's it, this displaces local rent control. It does not. Okay, it's a supplement to it. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so we talked about this 10%, but it's 10% of what? It's 10% of the rental price. How do you calculate the rental price? So there's the formula A, the A calculation, and then there's the B calculation, okay? And A calculation is really designed towards places that have been on the market recently, okay? So, so there's three scenarios here, general scenarios that are covered. The easiest one is, well, it was rented in the year prior and the person's still there and, and so it's just the price that you're charging that tenant who was there on January 7th. Then there's a scenario of, well, on January 7th, it was vacant. So what do you do? Well, you look back to the past year and assuming you've rented in that past year, what was the most recent rental price? Okay, that's what you use for that 10% calculation. Let's say it was rented, you're doing fine, but then your tenant, for example, says, I'm done with LA. Between the earthquakes and now the fires, I'm out of here. And they leave, okay? And it becomes vacant. Well, what do? Now you have a choice. You can either, and here you get the greater of. Okay, it's either the greater of the actual rental price paid by that tenant who left, okay? Or it's 160% of the HUD fair market value. Let me explain that, it's a mouthful. So the Federal Housing and Urban Development Department has a website, and this is really used for calculating what they reimburse for Section 8 housing, okay? And they determine for all the various zip codes, and later on, you'll see that I have a link to where to find this, okay? But they determined, what a 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom place in this zip code, for example, that's the fair market value rent. We know that's a little low because this is really calculations for, Section 8 housing. So the figure for the purpose of this statute in calculating rental price is 160%, 1.6 times whatever that HUD FM fair market value is, okay? And here, for this provision, you pick either the greater of the 160% of HUD or the actual rental price of the tenant who moved out, okay? And again, here's a reference to the 5% if you went from unfurnished to fully furnished. And then just, again, makes emphasis, you can't do other things like gardening, utilities, and stuff like that to jack up the rent above and beyond this 10%. Okay, next slide, please. So now what if, so this is Formula B now. We talked about Formula A. What's about Formula B? Well, this is for if you haven't put it on the market in the last year, what I'll sort of call new housing, although it could be, somebody just hasn't had it on the market for a long time and now wants to, offer it. They're seeing an opportunity. Well, here, the rental price is considered the 160% of the HUD fair market value that we just went through. And here is the link to where you can find that, and you can search on that website for your zip code and what is the HUD value, and then you multiply it by 1.6 or 160%. Okay, and that's your base value, and then you can add 10% to that. Okay, and again, we emphasize, okay, furnished, unfurnished, okay, on furniture and furniture only. If you're going from unfurnished to furnished, you can add 5%. Everything else, don't even think about it. Okay, I'm now supplying gardening. Now I'm supplying utilities. Those would just be considered, schemes to try to get around the 10% limit. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so this is the short-term rental, the Airbnb section, if you want to call it. And my apologies, the Verbo and all the other, places that do this as well. So if you continue to charge at a daily rate, if that's what you're doing, in other words, if you're continuing to be an Airbnb or Verbo, as most people understand it, then your price, the rental price, is the price that you were charging at the time of the declaration. Or actually, you use Formula A, I should say. Okay, you use Formula A that we went through, which is generally going to be the price you were charging. Okay. If, however, let's say you had a Airbnb, you were doing it, for a few days or a week at a time, and now you've got a tenant who wants to really stay there for some months because their house has to be rebuilt. Then you have to use Formula B, the 160% of HUD. Okay, so that's how you calculate it. If you've got an Airbnb, and it really depends, are you continuing it as an Airbnb? Then it's generally going to be the price you listed it at. Okay, so don't be raising it more than 10% of that. And if it's now you want to convert over to a more long-term situation, then you use the 160% HUD fair market value. Okay. And then you can add 10% to that. Okay, and then next slide, please. Okay. Any of the following. Okay. So this is for mobile homes. Again, some people maybe, I know there's a shortage of housing, and some people, maybe moving into mobile homes, even if they haven't previously lived in one. For existing tenants, it's simply going to be the local rent control that controls. Okay, so if a person is in the mobile home park, and generally they own their home, it's the thing, the home, the building, if you will. They own the mobile home, but they lease the land or space underneath it. They're going to be protected by local ordinance, okay, local rent control ordinance. For new tenants that are subject to rent control, but they're new tenants, it wasn't rented at the time of the emergency declaration, the rental price to use is the local rent. I'm sorry, the last rent charge for that space. Okay. And for spaces that are not subject to local rent control and not rented, in other words, are empty, the amount of rent last charge. Okay. So that's mobile homes. If we can move on. And this provision is, it just simply says that you can't evict somebody to try to get around these provisions. But if you pay careful attention to all the price restrictions, this would never have worked anyways, okay? But it emphasizes, on top of everything else, you can't evict somebody and then try to increase your rental prices, beyond what was allowed by E, for example. Okay. And also, in terms of evictions, this isn't really a class on evictions. So there's obviously lots of state and local laws that limit the ability to evict people, and so you have to be cognizant of that. Next, please. This is how serious this is. And I started out this by saying, this is in the penal code statute, and that's very significant. It's a misdemeanor. It's punishable by imprisonment in county jail for up to a year and a $10,000 fine. And just so you know, in a criminal case, there's also, and generally where there's a victim who has out-of-pocket money, restitution. So we're talking about, and so that's on top of the 10,000. So paying back the excess rent would be a restitution order, a fine up to $10,000, and jail time. That's what people are looking at who violate this. Okay, so it's very serious consequences, and so that's one thing. It's also considered a violation of this section. Price gouging is considered an unlawful business practice and an act of unfair competition, and that's subject to civil penalties. Okay, so the DA's office, the California Attorney General, and the city attorneys, LA City Attorney, as well as the Santa Monica City Attorney, with our permission, we would probably grant permission, can go after you as a civil enforcement action. Next slide, please. Okay, and before I get to this, I also want to caution people who are thinking of doing this that independent of worrying about prosecutors, you've got to keep in mind that many of the people being displaced are customers or tenants, prospective tenants with means and are successful people. Many of them may be lawyers themselves, and many of them certainly can afford lawyers. And so think through, and for the lawyers, please discuss with your clients, and for people in the audience who may be landlords, think through carefully. Independent of the criminal case, which I'll give you an example of that was just filed Tuesday, and there's more on the way, by the way. Think through carefully the consequences of what you're about to do. If you're thinking, I'll get away with it. Not only do you have to worry about law enforcement, you're going to have to worry about your tenant. Your tenant who you've taken advantage of, okay, by violating the law and raising prices more than the law allows. So do this thought experiment with me. What if in 6 months, when they no longer need to be where you know, out of their house is ready, or maybe a year or whatever it is, maybe it's a year and a half, I don't know. They decide, you know what? You owe them money because you charge more than Penal Code Section 396 allows. Or maybe the way it plays out is, and they make a demand, they hire a lawyer, they make a demand. What's your defense going to be? Well, you don't have one, okay? Or maybe the way it plays out is at some point, they calculate how much they've charged, they know what your prior rent was, and they know they overpaid by this amount, and they say, you know what? You charged me too much. You charged me in violation of Penal Code Section 396, and I'm going to stop paying rent, and I'm going to offset the amounts you owe me as rent. And now what are you going to do? Okay. So there are, and by the way, if people are thinking, well, I'll just lock these people out, I'll retaliate. You don't want to do that. Lockout has very serious consequences, as anybody who practices landlord-tenant law can tell you. So I'm talking because I'm a prosecutor about all these criminal consequences, and we'll get to one. And there's a question about Nobin's being going to jail, and we're about to get to an example. Just filed this Tuesday. Just give us a little time. People are going to be suffering criminal consequences, and more of these are on the way. But what you're looking at is Mike Kobesi, I believe is his name. I hope I pronounced the gentleman's name correctly. And he's a realtor. And, if you look on his website, like he's the #1 realtor in La Cañada, and likes to post pictures of himself with fancy cars and so forth. He's not doing so well. Actually, that should say Tuesday. I believe it was filed on Tuesday. Yeah, Tuesday. So, so the California Attorney General filed the first criminal price gouging statute this Tuesday. And without giving away too much, there are more on the way. Okay. And they're more on the way from our office. And they're more on the way from the LA City Attorney and Santa Monica City Attorney. Takes a little bit of time to prosecute these cases. So again, if you're one of these landlords and you're breathing a sigh of relief and you think I've gotten away with it, I wouldn't breathe so easily. Okay. And again, it's not just us, it's your tenants. Just think about that and what your tenants and their lawyers are going to do. And if your response, by the way, to these tenants is going to be, my goodness, you signed a lease, you agreed to pay these higher rates, they're going to look at you and say, no, this is illegal. You know, you can't sign or waive away the right of somebody to commit a crime. And that's just Hornbook law. So anyways, next slide, please. Now, also keep in mind, and I'm not necessarily saying how often we would do this, but in a particularly egregious case, maybe somebody who's engaged in a pattern and practice of advising their clients to do this, and there's a Penal Code Section 182. It makes it a conspiracy to commit any crime, including a misdemeanor. In other words, the misdemeanor gets elevated to become a felony, okay? Becomes a felony with up to 3 years in prison if there's a conspiracy to commit that crime, even if the underlying crime is a misdemeanor. Well, a conspiracy is just simply an agreement between any two or more persons. So a potential example could well include a landlord and a realty agent, okay? They've agreed. Now, again, it's not to say that this is going to be used in every single case, probably not. But certainly, this is something a prosecutor would have to look at in the context of maybe somebody who's doing this a lot, doing this with intentionality and flouting the law, even after it's become abundantly clear that they shouldn't be doing this. Next slide, please. Now, here's a scheme that we're seeing. And for some reason, people seem to think that this works. And this is a quote from Attorney General Bonta. He's even put out a public statement on this so that no one's surprised. So the scenario is a bidding war, right? The scenario is, and some landlords have this belief, or realty agents have this belief. And by the way, I hope you're not a realty agent advising your clients to do this. And I can't imagine an attorney giving advice of this like this. But some people are thinking, well, as long as you don't offer or advertise a price that's increasing more than 10%, let's do something clever. Let's cause a bidding war. Let's tell people that, oh, well, lots of people are looking at this place. Lots of people are looking at it. And, a few days from now at 5 p.m., everyone's going to submit their proposals, their applications. So, you're free to, put whatever you want in that application. And now there's this bidding war. And the bidding war results, let's say, in something that is 30-40% increase in the rental price, okay? Maybe 50% from somebody who's pretty desperate. So this is Attorney General Bonta. Reports of rental bidding wars are deeply concerning, especially because some landlords seem to be encouraging them. The bottom line is this: landlords cannot charge or accept rent that exceeds the 10% cap set by California's price gouging statute, even if they find somebody who's willing to pay it. Now, where's Attorney General Bonta, the chief law enforcement officer, whose opinions, by the way, carry persuasive weight in the courts? Where's he getting this? Notice the word charge. Next slide, please. Penal Code Section 396E says you cannot advertise, offer, or charge. Okay? The verbs there are advertise, offer, or charge. And it applies to prospective tenants as well as existing tenants. So the moment you accept and the moment you take that first month's rent deposit, and I assume people are going to be having to do that for any normal transaction, you're charging, okay? So if you're being, advised by real estate agents, I can't believe that a lawyer would give this advice. You know, just look at the words of the statute. Look at what Attorney General Bonta has said. So, and again, you know, you're going to have to worry about prosecutors, and you're going to have to worry about the tenants that you didn't treat so well and that aren't going to be too motivated in 6 months. You know, what are you going to say to them? That you didn't treat them well, and so why should they treat you any differently? So let's move on to the next slide. So in terms of prosecuting cases and, you know, looking at whether to prosecute and whether to prosecute as a misdemeanor or a felony and all these things, I'll just give you generally what prosecutors look at, okay? Number one, did the property owner correct things before being contacted by our office? If we could hold on, all our prosecutors, city attorneys, California AG, my boss, Nathan Hochman, have been trying to tell people, trying to tell the community, don't do this, okay? It's really hard for us to believe by now, and it's all over the news, that people don't realize what the rules are, okay? So if despite all that, you're just determined to do this, you're determined to risk prosecution, and as my boss, Nathan Hochman says, public humiliation, if you're willing to risk that, and you're willing to, you know, risk that your tenant that you're renting to doesn't turn on you, okay? If you're willing to risk all of that, I got to tell you, that looks pretty bad. And so we're looking at, you're on notice. Did you correct the problem before our office had to reach out to you, okay? Second factor, when you're contacted by the office, so for example, the Attorney General's office has sent out 500 letters now to people, warning them and reminding them of their obligation. Did you correct it? Or did you just throw the letter in the trash bin thinking, they'll never come after me? You know, something I suspect, like, you know, Mr. Kobasi thought until Tuesday, okay? And some other realtors and landlords are gonna maybe have thought that are gonna be filed on in the coming days and weeks. Number three, how much was the increase? Okay, you know, there's some numbers, plausibly, maybe it was a math error. Okay, some people are not as good at math, but you know, 30% or 40%, 20%, whatever that number is, you know, the more, obviously, the more aggravating it is. Number four, please. The number of properties. Are you, you know, somebody who just has the one property that this happened with, or do you have multiple properties? Are you an apartment landlord, a professional who really ought to know the rules and, you know, may even belong to the, you know, landlord associations and things like that, that I know are reminding people not to do this, okay? 5, affirmative acts by the property owner, okay? If we're looking at a property owner, how did they participate? You know, how much did they instigate the behavior, okay? Number 6, the sophistication of the property owner. You know, somebody who's maybe, you know, their livelihood is really, you know, based on this, or they're an apartment owner, they've owned multiple apartments, for example, you know, they really ought to know the rules. So I have a question with regard to PC 3396 pertains to housing. Can you please clarify whether price restrictions on the sale of a home, primary residence in LA County? If so, what is the time period? So that falls within B, okay? So there was a debate about whether B, which prohibits limits on the increasing the sale or offer of sale of housing. Housing applies to rentals. There was a debate about that, but housing, I mean, if it means anything at all, it's got to mean the sale of a home at a minimum. And now, to make clear that rental is also covered, you have D and E, and B, the section that I'm talking about, which talks about sales of housing, has been extended for a year, just so people know. Okay, next slide. Where to report price gouging, okay? First of all, local law enforcement. There at times, sometimes the local law enforcement agencies wouldn't take matters that were paper heavy and financial because they would consider it a civil matter. But there's a lot of interest in your local law enforcement agencies to take a look at this. So I can't tell you how many agencies have reached out and said they're interested in looking at this. So first place to start would be your local law enforcement agency. And by the way, I wouldn't just report to any one. I would report to as many of these agencies as I can. So second is for Los Angeles County, we have a Department of Consumer and Business Affairs. Here is their website. Here is their phone number. Okay. And they have lots and lots of investigators to look at this, and we'll be working up cases with them, as well as working with, there's a task force, just so you know, Department of Consumer and Business Affairs, LA City Attorney, California Attorney General, our office, the LA County District Attorney's Office, LA City Attorney, and we're meeting as we speak, actually, about prosecuting these cases. And then there's the Department of Justice, which has taken a very keen interest in this. They were the ones who filed the first one on Tuesday. There's more coming, just so you know. All right, next slide, please. I'll quickly go through, we're running out of time. So about insurance and FEMA, the kind of scams and where to report those kind of scams. But I'll go through these very quickly. Next slide, please. On scams, I would just generally say beware of offers to do what you can do for yourself. There's lots of people who say for a price, they'll do this, or they'll, relating to FEMA or a home insurance claim. You don't need a lawyer to file a homeowner's insurance claim. And I'll take you through the rules about insurance claims in a second, the basic rules. And, it just, so beware of those kind of things. We see that typically, even outside disasters, we see this type of thing. FEMA, again, same thing. Just go to the website. You can start an application on your own for FEMA assistance. Next slide, please. So there's a question about if the 1-year prohibition that was mentioned, the executive order applies to all California counties. And the answer is no. It is the declaration of emergency, which triggers all these provisions. Governor Newsom made that apply to Los Angeles and Ventura counties. All right, so there are the insurance companies are obligated when you make an insurance claim. These are some timeline rules. I suspect the insurance companies under pressure from a very active insurance commissioner should behave themselves. You never know. Oh, just so you know, any denial of a claim by an insurance company, you can always appeal to the insurance commissioner's office. Okay, sometimes people don't know that. And in fact, it's required in their notice of denial of claim, or their, saying you're only going to get this amount or whatever it is, that there be a notice, a prominent notice that you can in fact appeal. And it's a violation actually of the insurance code not to have that notification to the consumer that they have the right to appeal to the insurance commissioner's office. But here's the time frame. I suspect we're going to see, just because of the volume, and hopefully the insurance companies are bringing adjusters in from wherever they can to handle the volume of claims. I'm told that's what's going on. But, you know, you may still see some delays. I suspect that's going to be a lot of it. So there's some citations to some administrative provisions, regulations that are on the books. So within 15 calendar days, the insurance company has to acknowledge your claim, has to provide you with the claim forms, and begin their investigation, okay? Within, if you communicate with the insurance company and it's obvious you're asking for a response, and it's always good to say, please respond, or, you know, make that explicit, although, you know, it can be implicit too. They have to respond to your communications in 15 calendar days. No more than that. These are maximums, okay? Next, please. And there is, in general, presumptively a 40-day time limit for them to decide your claim. You know, in this case of you know, burnt home, burnt residence, you know, is it a total loss, partial loss? You know, here's how much they're going to pay you. That should be taking place within 40 days. Now, sometimes they need more time. Well, if they need more time, they've got to give you a written notice of that before the 40-day time limit expires. And if they need even more time after that, they need every 30 days to give you a written notice saying, we need more time, we need more time. They have to specify in writing the reasons for the delay, the specific additional information they're waiting for, and an estimate as to when they're going to be able to decide, okay? And I know this is going to be important because, you know, a lot of people are going to be anxious and want to get started with rebuilding, getting their lives back in order. So, you know, we're hopeful that the insurance companies will honor their obligations. Next slide, please. Where to report the insurance scams. Sometimes they're scams, sometimes they're just unlawful claims handling. So one place is your local law enforcement agency, really for the scams, not so much for the unlawful claims handling. And then the Department of Consumer and Business Affairs will also accept complaints about this. And what's nice about them is they see lots and lots of complaints. They're investigating these things. They'll see patterns. If they see an insurance company is engaged in a pattern of unlawful claims handling, for example, you know, there are remedies that they can work with us to bring about. And the California Department of Insurance, that's their site and that's their phone number. And again, remember, any insurance decision can be appealed to the California Department of Insurance. And they're also staffing up people to help you if you want some advice about, free advice, by the way, about how to you know, file these claims and some guidance. They're a very good resource for that. Okay, next, please. Construction fraud. Okay, so this is getting a little ahead of ourselves, but there's going to be a phase of rebuilding, and I'm hoping, you know, already starting. But some rules about that I want to bring to your attention. Next, this is from experience with the Northern California fires. So prosecutors saw all sorts of people coming in from all over the country after the Northern California fires. And they're not licensed. They're certainly not licensed in California. And they're offering their services for debris removal or rebuilding, stuff that normally takes a contractor's license and permits and all that. Normally, that sort of behavior is a misdemeanor, but if the work that they're doing is to repair damage, is in response to damage or destruction caused by a natural disaster such as a fire, it becomes a felony, or potential felony, I should say, punishable by up to 3 years in prison. So very, very serious consequences. And we will be looking for those cases. It's important to use, people who are reputable, who are licensed, and who are going to pull your permits. Again, I won't get into the personal experience with one of my friends, but rebuilding a house without all the permits pulled properly, you don't want to do that. And if you're thinking, I'll just pay the license fee at the end of it, that may well not be what you're asked to do. You may be asked to tear down the unpermitted construction. So you don't want to go this route. So please use a reputable licensed contractor. Next, please. Just a couple of things that maybe people know or don't know. I apologize if you know this. A lot of people know these rules. The contractor, if they're doing work that's over $500, which you'd think for our purposes, it's almost all of it's going to be that. If it's over, it has to be a written contract, and any changes have to also be written and signed by the contractor and the homeowner. Next slide, please. And here's a really important rule. Contractors cannot by law demand any advance payment except the lesser of $1,000 or 10% of the contract price. It's the lesser of. And so I suspect that $1,000 amount is going to come into play with the size of contracts that we're talking about. There's no exception for special order materials. I need a down payment for this special marble tile that you want me to order. Nope. They'll order it, and it's a pay-as-you-go system. Okay. The only exception to the pay-as-you-go is the down payment or advance, which is the lesser of $1,000 or 10% of the contract price. Okay, next slide, please. And just remember, I won't go over it again. There's these rules on contractors not being able to raise prices by more than 10%. I have a question. Does your office take questions if a tenant or homeowner seeks clarification? Yes and no. Quite frankly, if the question is going to be from somebody trying to see if there's some scheme to get around the 10% limits, we're not going to endorse that. Okay. But if it's a genuine question about how does this law work, you'll see my name and number and contact information at the end of this. Next slide, please. Where to report contractor scams. Again, local law enforcement agency, the Department of Consumer and Business Affairs, and the California State Licensing Board. These are the people who regulate contractors, and that's a link to where you can start a complaint. Okay, next slide, please. Well, I would contemplated that this would be a live audience, but you've been plenty live in the chat box. So if we can put up my contact information. There it is. Okay, I'm Hoon Chun. I'm director of the Los Angeles County District Attorney Bureau of Fraud and Corruption Prosecutions. And please call if you have any questions. Okay.
This program and the associated written materials are provided for informational purposes only and are not intended and must not be taken as legal advice on any particular set of facts or circumstances. You should not act or refrain from acting on the basis of any content included in this program without seeking legal or other professional advice on your specific matter. This program contains general information and may not reflect current legal developments or address your specific situation. This program and the associated written materials are not intended as a solicitation.